Hey everybody, welcome to the channel. Michael Noland here, and tonight I wanted to talk about how the Rock and Roll Hall of Shame is at it yet once again. Now, tonight, before we get into the 2023 inductees, the initial inductees, I wanted to talk about how this ludicrous organization manages to survive in 2023. First of all, in February, we get this list, right? Then in May, we get a reestablished list based on votes. And finally, in fall, we are treated to some of the very best of award shows. Not. And as far as the list this year, well, all I can say is the shenanigans keep a-happening, don't they? Now, as you guys know, I've been very critical of Jan Wenner, not only with the way he ran Rolling Stone magazines, but how he has run the entire Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. But recently, we've been treated to new management, haven't we? We've talked about John Sykes in the past. I personally think he is a minion to Jan Wenner, and so Jan Wenner's control over this entire situation is still firm as far as I'm concerned. Now, I want to read something by John Sykes. He's the chairman of the board we talked about. He's responsible for this list as far as I'm concerned. And listen to what he has to say here. He says, "This remarkable list of nominees reflects the diverse artists and music that the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame honors and celebrates." Really, diverse. I love that word. What about the word divert? Think about it. They're both from the same root word. Divert meaning to go around, and diverse means pretty much the same damn thing when you're talking about the Rock and Roll Hall of Ignoramus, if you ask me. I mean, when are we going to get Lou Reed into the Country Hall of Fame? Or how about Olivia Newton-John's "I Honestly Love You" as the greatest hip-hop song of all time? Helen Reddy, "I Am Woman, Hear Me Roar" sounds like an excellent suggestion for the Rap Hall of Fame as well. You see, in his statement, he really tells us where his real true intent is, doesn't he? On one hand, using the word diverse, and on the other hand, using the term rock and roll. Rock and roll is either rock and roll or it is something totally different, and it's time to rename this. All right, so I'm going to get onto the list here, folks. And I do want to say this list contains some excellent artists. Some are rock and roll, and some of them should never have been even considered for this list. But for the most part, all of these inductees are either great singers or very talented at the very least. Now, to be honest, I like a lot of genres of music. I love great pop music. I love classical music. I love some of the solo singers from the 40s and 50s. I loved Frank Sinatra. And so this isn't just a matter of me being a one-trick pony. If it isn't rock and roll, you could die. Now, when I look at this list that we're going to be discussing tonight, I can only think of the many rock bands, truly classic rock bands that have deserved this honor not only for years but decades. This sets my teeth on edge, folks. I can't even begin to believe they still do this after all the criticism that they've endured. All right, so first up, George Michaels. Now, I know George Michaels famously stood in for Freddie Mercury during his benefit, and that gave him some rock cred. But when I listen to this guy, with the exception of a couple of cuts, first of all, the guy's got a great voice. I love it when he's saying, "Yeah, gotta have faith," and that had a bit of a rock tinge to it. But you know what? When I hear this guy's a pop singer. His whole demure, his carefully put together look, his carefully crafted 5 o'clock shadow, all of it to me is pop. A great pop singer, no doubt, especially on his own. Didn't care for any of his stuff before that at all. But a talented singer, a confused man, no doubt, but still very talented, and does not deserve to be on this list. We're talking rock and roll. We're talking about rock and roll being the predominant style by these artists, and rock and roll wasn't, to me, in his predominant style. He was pop. All right, next up, we're going to talk about 4 artists that are on this list, all women. We have Missy Elliott, we have Cyndi Lauper, we have Sheryl Crow, and finally, Kate Bush. All right, now out of those 4, 2 of them are definitely rock and roll to me. And of course, that would be the wonderful Sheryl Crow. I still say The Globe Sessions is one of rock's finest albums. This woman can write, and she is a great performer. I love her voice, and she's been in the trenches. She is so rock and roll. The woman got her teeth knocked out in a bar fight. What do you want? And thanks to Stranger Things, the world has been reintroduced to Kate Bush. About damn time, if you ask me. I'll tell you what makes this woman rock and roll, besides the fact that she's just a great singer-songwriter, is that she used members from the Alan Parsons Project on her albums. That was her working band in the studio. She has put together some of the very best and yet eclectic rock albums from the 80s onward. She has long been dissed in the community, and the only reason John Sykes and company are even giving her a tumble this time is because of the TV show Stranger Things, but a well-deserved nomination. Next up, Cyndi Lauper. She certainly looks rock and roll, and you know what? In my mind, Cyndi Lauper's one of those pop artists primarily who are almost rock and roll. I don't have a ton of problems with her being on this, but if this was truly a rock and roll Hall of Fame, I don't think she'd make the cut either. Which gets us to Missy Elliott. You know what? I looked her up. I'm not really familiar with her. I'm not big into rap. I'm not big into hip hop. I'm sorry, I'm just not. But you know what? I read her Wikipedia page, and it doesn't mention rock and roll anywhere. R&B is about the closest term to rock and roll when you talk about this woman. But you just watch her. She spent her entire career honing an art form that has nothing to do with rock and roll. But she'll be there, folks. You just watch. And you know what? In her acceptance speech, just like every single hip-hop and rap artist that has been out for the last few years, they'll talk up rock and roll. They'll talk about how rock and roll they are, and then not a word about it afterwards. You know, I'm so sick and tired of people showing up for their little trophies just because they showed up at the game. You know how all of that started in the late 80s and 90s, where it became popular to give all the kids who showed up to a game a trophy for participation. Sorry, that's not how it works. I'll never understand that mentality, and this is just the exact same things in my opinion. Next up, Iron Maiden. All right, now we're talking rock and roll. Now, I'm not a major Iron Maiden fan, but they've put out some damn good music, and you know what? At the very least, you can't say they're not rock and roll. They identify the genre very firmly, in my opinion. And you know what? So far out of the inductees, they are the most rock and roll, if you ask me. Next up, Joy Division, New Order. Yeah, that's right. 2 band names for the price of 1. I'm not really familiar with this band at all. I'm not into punk. I never was into punk. And evidently they are identified, or at least partially, as a proto-punk band. Now, you know, it's interesting because their early stuff I read was not punk at all. As a matter of fact, it was considered very generic. After the passing of one of their key members, there was a reconfiguration. And you know what? They decided to kill 2 birds with 1 stone on this band. Now, this may be a great band. I've got to give a listen to them. I will. But I got to tell you, compared to the other bands that are waiting in the wings, this is ludicrous to me. However, rock and roll they are. And if that be the decision of the Rock and Roll Hall of Shame, power to them. I have no problem with the induction. Of course, I have no trouble with Rage Against the Machine or Soundgarden, rightfully so. Although there are a few bands who have been waiting longer, and I feel both these bands could wait just a touch longer until we start evening up this list. All right, so on to the next inductee, the Spinners. Now, the Spinners is a fantastic act, but you know what really bugs me? It was years ago by them inducting bands exactly like the Spinners into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame that started the whole problem, if you ask me. This was the beginning of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame becoming the Whatever You Like Music Hall of Shame. Tribe Called Quest, they couldn't wait to get Jack White on this list, could they? Now, Jack White is one of those guitarists I have a whole lot of respect for, but you know what? The White Stripes had too bare of a sound for me to really get behind them. But you know, rock and roll, no doubt, and deserving of a nomination. I'm just not so sure they should be inducted this soon, especially when you consider the amazing talent that is still not inducted. Which leads us to Warren Zevon, very popular on pop radio. But you know what? This is one of those singer-songwriters that had that rock and roll attitude. And guess what? When I talk about rock and roll attitude, every music subgenre has its own attitude, right? I'm not saying that rock and roll is the only art form that has an attitude. They all have their own attitude. But there is an attitude to rock and roll that a lot of these artists don't have. But Warren Zevon is not one of them. The only caveat that I have to this nomination is that Billy Joel gets to write the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame and suggest that Warren Zevon is inducted. What the hell is that all about? Don't get me wrong, I love Warren Zevon. He is more than deserving of this induction. But you know what, folks? This is the Hollywood crowd all over again. Keep your damn mouth shut, Billy Joel. You're a great artist, you're a great singer-songwriter, and stay with what you know. All right, I saved this next one for last on purpose because I really am truly a big Willie Nelson fan. And talk about attitude, he does have a bit of a rock and roll attitude, that outlaw attitude, right? But you know what? That attitude is something that rock and roll shares with the blues and country western music, so that doesn't give him a pass. He is one of the world's greatest songwriters to ever live, and you know what? His work with the Four Horsemen is absolutely impeccable. And you know, there is a almost rock and roll flavor to some of his performances, and out of all of the inductees tonight that I don't agree with, that I don't feel should be on this list, Willie Nelson comes the closest. A huge Willie Nelson fan, a survivor of survivors, and a man with enough attitude to fill the state of Texas. What do you think? If you disagree with me, that's fine. You know what? The real flavor of what goes on with this channel is always found in the comments. That's the consensus. My videos serve as a question only. If you don't agree with what I have to say, don't have a conniption fit. Put it in the comments. All right, so that's my video for tonight, folks. If you enjoyed the video, please consider giving it a thumbs up. That helps the YouTube, whatchamacallit, do its job a little bit better. The channel gets to grow. The tribe gets to grow. The dialogue grows in the comments, folks. And if you haven't subscribed to the channel as of yet, it is so easy. All you have to do is hit that subscribe to the tribe button, then tap that top bell icon, and you'll be notified of all my future videos concerning classic rock and rock and roll today. You see, unlike the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, I have no problems identifying what's really rock and roll and what's worth talking about. All right, I'm Michael Nolan. This is The Bottom Line, as always. And folks, we are the tribe, and I'll see you in my next video.